The old idea is that there's 3 levels to life. In mythology, you always do 3s. It's like beginning, middle, and end, and everything else becomes 3. Third time is the charm. That's a mythological statement. So the first level of life, I call the literal. Nowadays, people might call it the practical or the logical. It's the level of life that you can measure, so that someone says, I heard you going on a journey. Where are you going? And you say, well, I'm going to this place. And then they say, how far is it? And then you say, oh, let me look it up on Google. Anyway, that's what people do now. And when you look it up on Google, it tells you how many miles it is. It tells you the count. Someone measured it. And then it tells you how long it's going to take you to get there by car. But you can hit these little icons, and it tells you how long it takes by bike, how long it takes if you're walking, as if everybody walked at the same rate. But anyway, the idea is that's the first level of life. Call it the Google level of life, where things are being measured, and the measurements are more or less repeatable. If you look at one site, it tells you it's this far to the place you're going. The other site will tell you roughly the same idea. You can agree usually on those literal elements, but that's the first level of life. And you could also call it the world of one measurement. Or in a psychological term, I guess you could call it the world of me, the world where I'm the one that's important. The singular me is that first world. So then the second level of life is a doubling of the first level. And you could call that the psychological level, because in the psychological level, it becomes me and how I feel. It becomes me and you. It becomes about relationship, one to the other. And so if the question is, where am I going? I'm going to such and such a place. Well, psychologically, the measurement doesn't tell you much, but a person can say, why are you going to that place? Oh, well, that place to me is a beautiful place. I was there once. I want to go back. Well, why do you want to go back? Because when I was there, I felt whole. I felt genuine. I felt connected to that place. I felt, let's say, nourished by the spirit of that place. So now you're getting another deeper level, a doubling of the understanding and the presence of life, the psychological. And so the psychological then also becomes all about the relationships, that I'm going to that place because there's someone there I love. Well, that's very different than how far is it, how many miles it is. It can be many, many miles to the person we love, or it can be one step. Now we're in a different world that gets measured differently, that's deeper, more complicated, but maybe for this discussion, more importantly, more interrelated. So psychology doubles the world and gets us more related to other people, but also to the inner part of ourselves, and so on. And so that's the second level of the world, and it's a more meaningful level. And right now, with the world in turmoil, the psychological level becomes very important. For instance, you could say that, I'm here in America, and right now the president or the person in the office of the presidency is Donald Trump. And so someone could say, who's that? You could say, well, he's a 72-year-old man, claims to be a multi-billionaire. You could do the measuring and the counting, which is, by the way, what he does. But you could also say, I don't know how this happened, but someone who has an obvious pathological disorder and a wild amount of narcissism was put in charge. In other words, you could look at it psychologically, not just politically, and get caught in opposition, but say, hey, something happened here where people, I don't know, in a moment of confusion, put in place one of the least likely people to handle power in a good way, because an exaggeration of narcissism will destroy any creative use of power. But also that level of narcissism makes the person incapable of empathy and compassion, and therefore they have to hurt people when they have power without having meaning and grounding and purpose in their life. That's like a psychological view of what's happening. So it adds something. I think it helps explain something, but that's not the whole world either. So the third layer is the mythological layer, which turns into 3 things: you, me, and the divine. You, me, and the surprising spirit that becomes present when we come together. So now we're talking about, where are you going? And the answer is not simply counting the miles, or not simply saying because there's something about that place that compels me, but now it's saying that I'm going in that direction because something connected with the divine is pulling me there. So the third level adds the element of spirit, adds the element, I'm just calling it the divine for the moment. It means something eternal. I'm going to that place because I felt eternity there. Something awakened in me that was beyond me. Something happened that made me feel deeply connected to things that are seen, but also the unseen things that are around us all the time. So that becomes then a journey that's more of a mythic experience, more like traveling further into the myth of who we might be, as opposed to simply traveling out a number of miles. So what does all that mean? Well, right now, in mythic terms, we are in the collapse of a world. We're in the unraveling of a world. And it's wise to recognize that. It's a matter of running towards the roar and saying this world is roaring with chaos and disorder. Now, I think it's our responsibility to witness that, to look at it and own what it is. But the other side of it, the other side of the mythological stuff, is that the world renews ourselves. So if we're ever going to get out of the trouble we're going to need not just better narratives, we certainly need better narratives on a political level, on a psychological level, but even on this level of myth, because in myth, the world cannot end. The world as we knew it, that's like already over. But through descending into darkness and disorder, the world renews itself, and we can become part of that renewing on the other side of the roar. In other words, mythic narratives are necessary for having a capacity to imagine transformation of the collective, of the planet, and of our role on it at the same time. That's mythological thinking, not psychological thinking or logical thinking. And I love the idea that there's a term called mythological, suggesting that myth has its own logic. And it's the logic of inspiration, transformation, and kind of radical change of life. And so I think we're in a time when myth is needed in order to be able to tolerate the amount of change going on. And the good news about myth is most ancient myths imagine the world going through darkness in order to refine itself in a new shape. And so I think mythic narratives can relieve us of some of the collective anxiety and tendency towards despair. Myth imagines the world going on, and also most myths imagine humans as agents of ongoing creation.